Welcome back to another episode of Taking Inventory. This week, we're joined by Michael Cassidy, who's the founder and CEO of M3, building the future of brand commerce. Michael has a long history in ad tech and tech in general. So super excited to hear, Michael, your whole journey and kind of your perspective on what's taking place in the space. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on today.
Let's start maybe with your career starting at about.com, and you've led some really big companies along the way. So can you walk us through and talk through a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, happy to. I think it starts with being super fortunate that the internet kind of began and started to take off at the time I was graduating college in the late '90s. And I have no crystal ball, but I do remember back then thinking, this thing's pretty cool. This thing that seemed like it has some legs, and I should try to find a job in and around the internet, whenever exactly that meant. And lo and behold, I got into internet advertising, and fortunately, it ended up being a good decision or a good stroke of luck. So with that, I got to a company called About.com. It was originally called miningco.com. And the concept of it was the founders that they were helping mining for information, pulling information from across lots of different topics. When I graduated college and family members would be like, okay, where are you working? What's happening in your life? And I'm like, yeah, I'm in a company called Mining Company. And they literally, envisioned me in Pennsylvania with like a pick and axe, whatever a miner might do, and didn't realize like it was this digital business, this different sort of way of pulling information. So worked there, company changed, became about.com, and got to see a pre-IPO company, an IPO company, a $100 share price, a dollar share price. Yeah, it was wild, and obviously it's served as a strong foundation from there.
Was it as, like, wild as, like, we would have pictured? 'Cause both of us, I think we both graduated high school in 2003, so we, like, missed all this stuff pretty much, and, like, you read about it, like, I picture, like, it was like Great Gatsby, like, it was just, like, is that a fair a view of it?
Yeah, it was. I was a totally mediocre student. Kind of B's when things were working well.
Nice.
And the college I went to, called Oswego, is known for beautiful sunsets, having like the most bars per capita in the U.S. I don't know if it still holds that distinction, but that's what it was known for. So college was like fun, right? There was no shortage of going out and being social. It's very possible I had more fun those first few years in New York City, in and around the internet, and what you're alluding to, James, because I mean, just like the parties, the activities, it was just like money was getting thrown out, and everybody was young and everybody was trying to figure out. So there was like this commercial thing kind of happening, but there was also like everybody was in this new frontier. It was like we were kind of just getting to the West, and we're just like all embarking on this journey and not knowing where it would go. So it was amazing. Fast forward a couple of years, 2001, there's the dot-com bust, if you will. And then a lot of people left because it got challenging and never got back into it. But yeah, those first few years in New York, and I had less exposure to California, but I mean, I'm sure it was the same in San Fran and probably even LA as well.
Do you think there's analogs to, like, this AI kinda wave right now? Like, it feels like, and obviously we're investing a lot in it and for our company, but, like, it feels right now, unlike a lot of, like, maybe the crypto period where, like, you were unsure how much that would, like, take hold of, like, all the product development, like, this is, like, if you're not building with these AI APIs, like, you're gonna get left behind, it feels pretty obvious. Is that what it felt like with the internet?
Yeah, I think there's so much conviction behind it. And I think the internet early days also had a very creative component, so probably a little bit more than AI, because you had, especially in New York, you had the media capital of the world. And so you had all these established broadcasters, print magazines, radio, these were big businesses. Like these were the Fortune 500 in many regards. And then most of what was happening in digital was outside of those businesses. AOL Time Warner was like a real watershed coming together. And then ultimately the company I worked for, About.com, was acquired by Prime Media, which owned a ton of magazines. So there was some of this happening, but there was very much like, the new kids on the block and then the olds. I would almost imagine it was probably like, rap music, hip hop coming out to the scene in the 1980s and kind of shaking some stuff up. But I think with AI, the energy, the enthusiasm, the belief, the conviction is probably very comparable, which I think leads to a watch out, which is nobody would have forecast, or many would not have, I'm sure some did, that the internet would have hit bumps like it did. Not too many. And so then you think about AI, well, certainly green fields. You got to imagine there's a couple of pits now and again, right? There's a little bit of tripwire, and how are we maybe eyes wide open? So running fast to take advantage, but also, being prepared if we trip, how do we respond?
And I mean, looking at your kind of background and your experience up to now, it looks like you've been at the forefront kind of at various stages in tech. I mean, you were there, pre bubble burst with About. Let's talk a little bit about, founding Undertone and how you saw an opportunity in the market. And then we can get to maybe what you did with your family office and getting into e-commerce. I think at a time that was earlier than we saw the boom of like Thrazios and people acquiring and rolling up these e-commerce companies. And you've been at the very forefront of all of these. So let's start with Undertone, and then we'd love to kind of hear on the e-commerce side as well.
Yeah, so with About.com, I was there for 2.5 years. My father worked in his company before he retired, I think 48 years, basically my job from 18, 17 through. And so I thought I was going to be there forever because I had that inspiration of, hey, this is what you do. This is what my dad did. And then 2.5 years later, the internet blows up, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about, what am I going to do? What am I going to do next? And what's funny is, in that journey, and I think back now, decisions we make, how obviously they impact us on the next component of that decision, but like ripple effects, right? And I think about jobs I turned down or didn't get, and what life would have been like if I went to hot jobs, or if I went to Google, or this or that. And ultimately, what I had passion about was starting a company. So I was 25, and started this business, which was a media buying service to start. I was really fortunate, and I didn't require outside capital because I was able to land some clients who basically funded the business without knowing they were funding the business. But by being such big marketers, I was able to go to market pretty quickly, spending money on behalf of Orbitz and Match.com and some really, dot coms that we know well. But back then they were either in beta or just getting going. And that served as a foundation to start a company and start to hire some people. And then I would have never expected it to become what it did, which is a business that, still exists today. So I served as the founder of Undertone, ran it as CEO for about 14 years. We had a private equity event along the way. We then sold it to a publicly traded company in 2015. And the fact that the company's still operating and seems to be doing pretty well from what I could tell is probably one of the things I take the best pride in, right? Because it was about building something that would be here, and whether or not I was associated with it was a little bit of an afterthought. It was more about, let something add value to the market, add value to the people who work there. And yeah, the fact that it's 20 plus years old makes me feel a little bit old, but also makes me feel, pretty gratified at the same time.
And is it kind of ironic? I mean, I know, and I've talked to Eric about this before, but like,
Yeah.
ad networks had like their kind of heyday, and then they kind of got out of fashion, and then now it kind of feels like they're like roaring back. Like, is it kind of validating to you to be like 20 years later that, like, the idea that you could like create some sort of synergy across all these different publishers to, you know, help them all make money, like, is held true? Or like, what when was there a moment where you were like, okay, these ad networks are going to fall apart?
Yeah, I mean, things go in and out of flavor, but if you look across every vertical, every industry, there are market makers, whatever you want to call them. We just happen to call them ad networks in this world, but in finance, there's all sorts of groups that help people invest and aren't directly the source of that investing. I mean, it happens in lots of places, right? There are people that have a certain expertise, a certain spin. There's sometimes there needs to be a layer between a buyer and a seller, that naturally makes it primed for, um, fragmentation. It also makes it primed for disintermediation and how people want to tackle that and try to solve it. But the internet's such a big place. It's such a wild place. It's such an unruly place. It's almost impossible to think you're not going to have these sort of organizations. So I think the ad networks have gone up and down. They've had different names. But I think the concept of trying to provide liquidity, trying to provide value, and also, there's a lot of entrepreneurs who do it because they want to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that as well. And the market will dictate whether they have that right or not based on if they buy their services or not.
After you sold Undertone, you remained chairman for a little bit, but you also opened a family office. I think a lot of ex-founders who have an exit, either go in-house at a venture capital firm, entrepreneur in residence, something like that, or they, become angel investors or start their own fund and start to capture capital. You started a family office and, said, we're going to invest in things we want. One of those was BVA, which was an agency for e-commerce companies. What was your vision starting the family office post exit? Like, was it to go acquire a company? Was it to invest? Like, how did you think through that versus maybe going to a big firm?
Yeah, so there were two drivers to begin with, and then for those of you not familiar, a family office is really, and it could be single, it could be multiple. It's effectively an individual or a family, single generation, multiple generations, managing their wealth in some sort of organized way, and managing their wealth, and whether their wealth is $1 million or $10 billion, it could be anything between or outside of those lines. Is what they're doing, and historically, you'd seen that kind of concept or term focused on those that we would know as Fortune magazine cover people and Forbes cover people. But it's become a term that's just more ubiquitous and used a little bit more liberally. And so the reason I want to do it, I think there were two drivers. One is I had a liquidity event, and I knew I wanted to make sure that whenever capital I was fortunate enough to pull out from the company would be here in the future for myself and perhaps, heirs and descendants if I was fortunate enough to have them. And so I needed to be a better steward of capital. I needed to better understand risk profiles, allocation, reporting, analytics, stuff I didn't lean into, stuff I still to this day don't really like, but knew it was a responsibility that I had because I was fortunate enough to be in a position to have a dollar plus to my name. So it started with that. And then second is I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I've reached points, I'm sure others who listen have as well, where, you maybe get out of a business, whether you sell it, it goes away, whatever the circumstance. And then you're at a point where you're like, I don't know what I want to do. And it's a better problem to have than to be that person on the unemployment line that has to work, but it's still a problem. And it can be very challenging. It can be really hard. It can hit your psyche. You're not sure what to do. And I was at that point. I didn't know what to do. And so part of this was creating a little bit of structure, having a desk, getting me going during the day on some stuff, and then seeing if that were to lead to other ideas, other people, other connections. And luckily, I could talk more about it. It enabled me to form a thesis, which led to the acquisition of a couple of
And,
companies.
and were you investing across like all like was it like it was like a real family office? Like you were like you're going there and you were like investing in hedge funds, you had public equity, you were doing it all.
Correct. I would rely on the public stuff and the hedge funds with a little bit more of a group that I had because that was their expertise. Where I got enjoyment was I did some of the angel investing, but then I found less enjoyment from that. Like it just to just cut lots of 25 or $50,000 checks. Like, and even if they did return something, I just found like that's great, but it didn't give me purpose or joy or something. What I've spent a lot of time on was opening up and trying to create access to venture capital and private equity because I just believe in the asset class so much. And I knew if I wasn't going to have that sort of VC or private equity backed company that I had shares in that I had created, I wanted that. And so a lot of it was honestly, it was a startup. And then I was hustling. I was cold calling and cold emailing, some of the top funds and just saying, hey, little old me, I'd be your smallest LP limited partner. But, I'd love to if I can. And a lot of people didn't respond. A lot of people said no. But the 20 or 30% did, then it created a way for me to build some relationships and then allocate capital in a way that was interesting to me and I thought would be useful.
Interesting. I didn't even know. It's funny. I've never really, like thought of that. Like we do angel investing, and I'm an LP in some of like my buddies' venture funds, but I never even like thought of the idea you could call. Like if I see a fund I really like, you could like call and be like, "Can I invest in this?" It's like you're
Yeah,
literally just
yeah.
doing that.
It was literally, hey, and the sales job, like, hey, I am, whoever I am, and I have a little bit of money and I had a business. And my angle was, I don't have as much money as everybody else you're talking to, but I'm kind of in these markets and I've been around businesses and maybe I'll have entrepreneurs who I meet who are looking at capital and maybe some introductions or if I can ever be useful. And I find that a lot of the venture capital and private equity groups, they're very smart at wanting to have an ecosystem around them, right? Because they know deal flow is such a challenge. It could be a commodity. And then if they have business, having people who can help them, whether it's going good or whether it's going bad, And so it ended up being a way where I got enough yeses to feel like I could allocate a little bit
Was
in that regard. But I knew that was temporary. That wasn't going to keep me busy forever.
was your team just like, oh no, Michael, like let's go public equities, let's go bonds, fixed income. My wife's in wealth management, and every time I like bring an angel investment to her, she's like, sure, go have fun with that. But our real like futures, like things that are sure, not risky bet.
Yeah. One of the open questions for me, I've never really gotten a great answer to, and I've tried to join some groups to help is how much money should you allocate to venture capital? And obviously it varies how much money you have, how old you are, what you do for a day job. But if you took 5 people who have the same amount of money and similar enough situations and ask them, what are they doing? How are they doing it? I've met people who have 1%. I've known people that have like 70%. So what do you do with that? Do I split the difference and that's my allocation? So it's crazy because your wife's right and you're right at the same time. Or maybe I should say wife's
I'm gonna tell her
right.
that. I'm gonna tell her Michael said I'm right sometimes.
Yeah.
Where,
Yeah. This is the part we have to edit, guys, because otherwise we may maybe burning a
where,
bridge on that.
what percentage do you have, like, now that you've actually done it? Like, do you have a point of view for people? Like, obviously not financial advice, all that stuff, but like roughly
Yeah,
speaking.
yeah. For me, I wanted to get into like the 20s and 30s and then just keep going from there. And so I continue to assess and look at it. And then part of it becomes with this new company I have, does it become something? I hope it will. I think it will. And then if it does, then I start to think about that as, private equity venture allocation. And then does that throw off the other? So it's a, moving target. I don't have a set one, but I have enough conviction in the asset class, going back to what you guys brought up with AI and all these other things that are happening. So part of it becomes conviction in the asset class. Then it's trying to find the right managers. And there's a whole other topic to be done on diligence and how do you figure that out? And that's still honestly a huge work in progress.
One quick anecdote to that is before we definitely want to get into the business you ended up starting through the family office, but I was talking to a friend and I was like, yeah, I think I'm pretty diversified. And I was like explaining things. And it was like, that's like 50% ad tech. Like sure, public and private, and like one's a fund. It's like they're all the same business. It's like, shit, you're right. Like,
Good point.
yeah, like okay, that's a good point.
Annoyingly good point.
Yeah, I was like, maybe I should do something different. But
Yeah.
anyway,
So you're talking to all these venture funds, you're cold calling, which is amazing. And then you said as you had these conversations and as you're looking at the markets, you started to develop a thesis around the market. And so what was that? What was that process like and what came out of it?
Yeah. So I think it started with I didn't want to work a startup schedule. Like I didn't want to be that kind of CEO at that point in time in my life with having taken a break from a really great experience at Undertone, but just a really tiring one. I could just feel I wasn't ready to do that sort of thing. All that goes into it, and the good, but the hard and the difficulty, as you guys know, right? Having been around those businesses and created them yourselves. So I wanted something I felt like would be more match lifestyle with where I was. One of the best decisions I made over the Undertone journey was bring in a private equity partner. And it wasn't just to bring in the private equity partner, it was who the partner was. And it's a group called JMI. And I remember at the time there were a couple choices, but I felt very comfortable with that group. I felt like they believed in what we were doing and economics were good enough, right? It wasn't about like you have to be the highest, but it's like you got to be in the game. But it felt like the intangibles were really solid. And luckily that turned out my gut on that was right. And it made a big difference because I think through their involvement, it made me a better CEO and it made the company a better organization, both directly and indirectly from the influence, the accountability, the coaching, and so on and so forth. And so when I started thinking, all right, what can I do? Reflecting back on things I thought I was okay at, avoiding things I didn't think I was okay at, I kept coming back to that thinking, that experience I had is really valuable. How does that get shared with other entrepreneurs? And realize that while there's a ton of private equity and private money, most of it's geared, understandably, for businesses 5, 10 million plus in annual EBITDA or profit. And when you get below 5 million in annual profit, just the option for that entrepreneur it's not as good. There's not a lot of them. And then the people that are there, I just didn't find to be as value add as what I had experienced. So with a partner named Stephen Wall, who comes from strategy consulting, we decided we were going to go target business owners who had companies of the size I described, under 5 million of EBITDA, and see if we could be helpful to them. And Stephen with his strategy consulting and me with my, A to Z from a beginning of a business to the exit of it. We thought that would be a good combination. And it proved out to be pretty well received. And so we basically started kind of like a small private equity fund, had a small team, and we were driving deal flow and looking at anywhere from 20 to 30 companies a week for sale. And ultimately, through that evaluation, developed a thesis, and it led to making one acquisition and then a couple others after that with BVA.
And so what is BVA, um, and what was the path once you guys got in, acquired it, and started taking a larger role?
Yeah, so BVA stands for Brand Value Accelerator. It was started by two entrepreneurs, really successful guys, Kyle and Dylan, and they got very early on in the Shopify, and they saw that Shopify as a technology platform was really democratizing what could be done. A little bit like what Salesforce did for CRM. You didn't need to go get a heavy SAP or whatever the example would be for CRM. You can start to go into the cloud and get a license. Shopify was that version for commerce, and I think those guys saw that this isn't going to be just for the big shop or the PTA or whatever it might be. It's got some potential. And to their credit, they were right. And so they built a business and ultimately decided, like sometimes founders do, we want to sell the business for whatever reasons, liquidity, go on to something else. And we learned about the business, studied the Shopify market. Shopify at the time was probably like a 20 to $25 billion market cap. But the more I read, the more I saw. Going back to what you guys described, you kind of sense when something's brewing and kind of feel it a little bit when you've been around the growth stuff, that there's some potential here. And it was more than just a feeling, but it was a feeling that led to, well, let's dig deep, let's get smarter, let's understand. And then BVA was a small business relatively to others, but the best at what it did. And we were fortunate enough to be the ones who successfully acquired it. And that was in August of 2018.
What's interesting about that timing, James and I have really fond and some not so fond memories, being at Snapchat during that time, and e-commerce was an advertiser set that we were heavily going after, and the broader team, that was a priority. But at the time, it was people building their businesses, their e-commerce businesses on the backs of social advertising. You get venture dollars, big checks, you pour it into Facebook, Google, Snap, you acquire customers at some customer acquisition cost, CAC, and you drive some LTV greater than that CAC. What we've since learned through COVID and now is those businesses aren't sustainable. And a lot of those kind of first generation uh, e-commerce direct to consumer businesses have run into some trouble. I think if you look at the ones that went public, we're now seeing a big pullback in the market, some going bankrupt, some getting bought for pennies on the dollar. What did you see at BVA? Because again, you were kind of in that sweet spot where that Gen 1 was kind of at the peak. There was a second generation coming up. You were pre-COVID, so like smashing through
Yep.
records. And then now founders that have profitability on their mind. So what did you see around 2018 that led you to believe like this is worthy?
And one other follow-up question is, how are you really good at spotting these impending
Yes.
bubbles and getting in before they start and monetizing them? And can you tell us
Yeah.
what Yeah.
So there's things I got. There's some things we got right with BVA, and there's definitely some things we got wrong. What we got right is that Shopify would grow, e-commerce would continue to proliferate. It was a wonky curve with COVID, where at the time, I mean, with BVA, we went into like shutdown, meaning like letting go of people, reducing salaries, like all the misery that we thought we did because we thought it was the right thing to do. And it was funny because looking back now, it was both right and wrong because a lot of our clients were the discretionary. Like we didn't help companies sell water or paper towels or things that people were stocking up on in April of 2020, I guess it was. We were helping with like cosmetics, clothing, apparel, and my crystal ball was wrong, and then I didn't think it would just bounce back so quickly. And so, with BV, I think going in from a thesis standpoint, it was commerce is going to continue to grow. Shopify is going to continue to grow and take share from Magento, now part of Adobe, Salesforce, and then some other legacy systems. I think the thing that looking back was most flawed in the thesis is that just because Shopify would grow, the ecosystem around it didn't grow to my expectation. So like at BVA, we were basically using the Shopify platform to build quote unquote enterprise sites. And enterprise in this world usually meant 25 million plus in GMV or annual sales. It could mean startups that were below that. That's not enterprise and what you guys used to focus on, or what I used to focus on, right? Um, but what I thought is the services revenue and the ecosystem around that would be bigger, and frankly, just more lucrative for a company like BVA, and that we could do more to capture additional wallet share or get more share from customers or prospects. And that just proved to be false. And so we couldn't grow the business as much as I thought we could. And so at that point, I realized, yeah, I should think about doing something else, right? Get a return, let it be a good enough return. So it proved right in that Shopify grew. Accenture ultimately bought the company. So one of the biggest businesses in the world who consults the biggest companies in the world thought there was something here. So we got that right. But just what the opportunity was never really came to fruition.
Was getting that deal done like pretty complicated, or was it, just so logical for them as a buyer that like you were able to kind of get it through the finish line?
Yeah, we took a step prior and got with another firm and it fell in within their orbit. And then there was some more scale with the plan that they were then very quickly going to go to market. And so we thought that was our best avenue because our size at the time, we're probably like 150 people. So decent enough size, but for Accenture, debatable if they would have done that. But then from my understanding, started to step away is that, what we were doing, that BVA within the new co was one of the most attractive pieces for the Accenture acquisition. But then Accenture could put their teeth around something bigger, more revenue, and they can underwrite it and just make it worth their time. Because when you're that large, whatever their revenue is, at some point you're just like, even if it's great, if it doesn't make financial sense,
They don't care.
I can't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about like being right about like the core asset, but then like the derivative is sort of like doesn't create much
Correct.
value. And I had that same experience with like my first company was like a Facebook ads business. And it was like the earliest one, literally like one of the earliest ones. And it was like, I was so bullish on Facebook and continue to be. And it like worked out and we sold it. It was a good outcome. But the reality is, if I would have, the day I started that company, if I would have just like gotten a normal job and put every dollar into Facebook stock, I would have made more. And,
I'm with you.
and so it was so interesting. That's actually why when the Snapchat opportunity came up, I remember talking to you about this, Daniel. I was like, I just sold my company and I was like, was being recruited to Snap and I was, people like, you're going to go get a job. And I was like, you know what? Like, I, I think the math's right. I think I'll make more money working here at this time.
Yeah.
And it was like such a counterintuitive thing. And so like, I try to be conscious of that now, but it's like, it's just, yeah, it's counterintuitive that you can be like, right. And then, orders of magnitude off on,
Yeah, you could be right and wrong on these decisions. And so I look back and I was right and wrong. But I look at it, when I look back, I look at it fondly from the standpoint of that step got me to where I am today, then got me to having this idea and this new business, which I have a lot of enthusiasm around. And so yeah, you're gonna be thankful for the journey, right? And the nuggets you pull from anything you do or in some cases don't do.
also worse things than selling your company to Accenture.
Yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's funny. Entrepreneurs are given so much more credit than they deserve for selling. And then oftentimes not enough credit when they don't sell, but they have a good business, right? It becomes, the measure of success, kind of like sports, right? Is you got to win the Stanley Cup, you got to win the World Series, you got to have, whatever it is. And then we ridicule the Charles Barkleys of the world for not taking something home. And then there's some players in sports who just seem to always win and get the accolades. And sometimes entrepreneurship feels a little bit like that. It's like, if you don't sell it and it's so on and so forth, it's almost like you didn't do what you were supposed to. And I think it's just such a false narrative. Or there's some ridiculous leaders and founders who won't have a liquidity event that's as publicized or at all. And they're like so much better then the entrepreneurs who've sold a couple companies and then those companies end up going away or getting folded. Like hey, you have some money in your pocket, but when you think about the real value created, sometimes I think it's unfairly distributed to one group over another.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good reminder for anyone that's founding a business, thinking
Yes.
about it, or kind of at a startup now. But I do want to get to now you've gone through two bubbles. You've been right, mostly on the macro level that we talked about, wrong on some micro levels, but good outcomes two times now. And now you've started another company. It sounds like based on that experience. So what are you doing today?
In the summer of 2023, my co-founder Greg Slaughter and I started a company called M3, which stands for Make Merchants Money. When we came up with the name, we started with, it's got to be a letter A or a letter B. I had been a U with Undertone for a long time, which meant at the conferences and the events, we were at the bottom. And I'm like, I want a little bit of the old phone book trick. Like I'm either going to be a 1, 2, 3 A or something. And so we focused on all these cool creative names at the top of the alphabet. But we kept coming back to this M3 because it just felt very like authentic. It felt a little cheeky. It felt a little bit like, you know what, that's what we're doing. Like we have conviction on this idea, and it's really about monetization for retailers. And you know what? Let's just like put it right out there. Let's just like make it abundantly clear. It doesn't set us up for a very easy pivot if this goes wrong, unless we can come up with 3 other M words or some sort of story on it's a spin on whatever. But we thought it really kind of put a stake in the ground and made us a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more outspoken, and so on and so forth. And so what Make Merchants Money in M3 means is we're creating a monetization opportunity for retailers. And I'll use the word merchants, retailers, e-commerce companies interchangeably. In the world of direct to consumer, in the world of Shopify, they refer to those companies as merchants. And then when you get into, Best Buy, Target, Yeti, others, I think of them a little bit more as retailers, but I use it interchangeably. And what we're doing is creating a monetization capability. It starts with the following is the data I just keep going back to. Average e-commerce conversion rate is 2%, 2%. And throughout the 2%, focus on the 98% that don't buy a thing. They don't buy a thing. And the reality is they never will. And you can spend millions of dollars trying to take your 2 to 2.05 and 2.1 and 2.27. And you should, but you're never getting much beyond 98 out of every 100 people are window shopping and do not put $1 in your pocket. Yet you spend money, time, effort getting them there, money, time, effort keeping them there. And I think you should, and more importantly, I think you are going to, it's required, have to monetize that investment. And I think the best way to do it is through advertising and brand partnerships. And that's the thesis behind M3.
I've come back to this a few times, I think, on the podcast, but that more than anything reminds me of just mobile app developers, something that they've known for years, right? If you're going to pay to get people to download your app, only a very small percent are going to convert to purchase something. The rest have to be subsidized through advertising, and that's going to subsidize your acquisition costs. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing for retailers, which has not been done, merchants and retailers. So what does the ad unit look like? What is that experience for the customer? What is that experience for the merchant?
Yeah. And you guys have a great perspective, right? Because you've studied this market and you've seen some of these trends and some of the challenges with this concept and also, the opportunity. And so the way I organize my thoughts are around there's 2 types of retailers. There's the marketplace, there's the grocer, the one that's made for, or retail media is made for that. Target, Walmart, Kroger, Safeway, Amazon. There's that crowd. Then there's your specialty, your vertical, I'm selling my own products. It's not a marketplace dynamic. It's Yeti creating, selling what they create, Apple selling what they create. And I think there's a difference between those two and there's some similarities, but there's enough differences that the first have a monetization tool and the second don't. So while we think there's application for both, we primarily focus on the second and got into these companies and said, I'll give you examples. If either one of you are shopping for luggage and you visit a Tumi, a Samsonite, in a way, pick a merchant or retailer, by default, unless you have this weird fetish of collecting luggage, you're probably a traveler or plan to be. And by that very definition, Delta, Marriott, Hilton, Avis, Airbnb, the list goes on, wants to reach you and has an ability to positively influence you and maybe add some value. And by doing that, it's a huge opportunity for said luggage company to add a little bit of value to consumer and then monetize. And so that's what we're doing. And then we can talk more about the retail media folks because there are some applications there, but it's really primarily focusing or starting with helping those companies create a new revenue stream that's just doesn't exist for them currently.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but like, Dale and I kind of we like love this idea, and like we had thought of iterations of it. I think where we got tripped up is like we get so like direct response oriented that it inevitably became like hard for us to like reconcile like some of the competitive dynamics. I think what's so cool about this is your point. Like it's such an obvious place for brand building and like brand affinity and for like brand advertising that it it it's like shocking it doesn't exist. It's like how is this like not, which is like a great problem to have, I think.
Yeah.
Have you found that people are starting now, like especially with like interest rates going up and people starting to look for, like you can just bring them free money, right? In theory. So has that been
Yeah.
the feedback?
Yeah. So, I mean, this isn't a novel idea. This isn't like, wow, I scored really high in the IQ chart clearly because of it. Like, it's not that. I just think it's an idea that's prime for this point in time. And it's inflation, COVID bringing sales forward, ad expense, Amazon, just, we know how hard it is and what we've all done to be a media publisher. Um, retail is the same thing. It's just hard to be a retailer. And I don't think it's ever going to get easier. And, increasingly, I think they're going to need to and have to find new ways to make money. And I think this is one way to do it. And I think you have to approach it from the brand standpoint for a few reasons. One, the luggage site isn't big enough. They don't have enough traffic that you can slap, a dollar, $2, $3 CPM and serve, 77 million impressions a day, a week. Like these are smaller. And I think it's a special audience. I think it's a special environment. And if that's the case, then I think you have to price it that way. I think you have to package that way. I think you have to position it that way. I think you have to report that way. I think everything has to be that. So we're trying to be in, a higher quality brand. We want to be, most of ad tech to me is like days in, no offense to days in. And we're trying to be the Ritz Carlton. Like it's as simple as that. We're trying to do something different that's much more creative, much more white glove. It'll be tech enabled. But ultimately, we're trying to match and create these really cool opportunities and integrations and, take different forms and different shapes. But that's the thesis, which is a harder business to build, excuse me, but it creates more of a moat around a company like this if and when we can do it effectively.
And are you doing this through the family office again?
So I'm funding it myself. I've decided at this point in time not to raise outside capital. That may change. It really just depends on, what's the growth on something like this. And so part of what I need to think about is as a CEO, but then also as a capital allocator and risk reward. And in general, it makes the most sense to fund it myself if I believe in it, because the multiple profile should blow away anything else I can do, right? Because it comes in at a penny a share or whatever it is. But at some point, you just start to think about additional sources of capital. And you also just start to think about other perspectives at the table. And you can get that outside of the capital process, but oftentimes, it's a little bit of a trade, right? Like there's going to be an investment and you typically get some pretty smart people around the business to be of help. But that's how we're doing it right.
I'm curious what the reception's been from merchants, because going back to the last 10 years, merchants have been conditioned to try to optimize that 2% opportunity, 2 to 4% conversion opportunity, tweaking buttons, colors, offers, all this stuff on their site to get someone to buy or to sign up for the newsletter. And conversations we've had with a lot of smaller Shopify founders is that they're so protective of that conversion, the path to conversion and their customer touch points. And so I'm curious what the reception has been for you and what has to happen in the market for people to decondition from what they've gone through.
Yeah. Yeah. So I get the caution. I think it's appropriate. honestly, and that caution will lead to some no's, which we get. But go back to the market timing. I think there's such strong factors that I really encourage whoever we talk to just like have an open mind, and you can say no, but I don't think you can say no to the fact you should be thinking about other ways to monetize besides selling your lipstick, your sunglasses, your hats, your luggage. And if it's different than what I've got, good, cool, good for you. I hope it works. If it's with a different company, we don't have another company doing what we're doing right now. So we fortunately and unfortunately, don't have others around us. But if you find other things to do, go for it. From a retailer, they're very protective of their audience and their experience, and they should be. And so I think this becomes a very, getting comfortable with us and feeling like we're approaching this in a way that works for them. And that's why this isn't a programmatic play to start. This isn't just take 1,000 ads and rotate it through. This has got to be a little bit more hand holding to start. There's not a data sharing component to start intentionally, because we want retailers to get comfortable with having a guest over for dinner. And then once that happens, then we can start to figure out, well, maybe we would want to take a trip together, or maybe we want to do some other things together. But let's not jump there just yet. For the retailer, it's let's find the right match. Let's make sure they know they have the controls, which they do. Let's start cutting this some checks so they can see that theoretical becomes actual. And then I think, it's great fields with what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, this is your third act. That the first two went pretty well. So a little hard to bet against you at this point. And you say you don't have a crystal ball, but I don't know. Your history may say otherwise. So we'll be watching as big fans from the sideline, and just super excited that you're able to join us today and talk us through M3, and excited to see where it goes. But before we let you go, where can people find you? What do you want to plug? This is your time.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, thanks again for having me on, guys. It was great to chat and have this discussion and think about things I maybe don't think about every single day. So, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I got a startup, and that means I wear the badge every single day and every single moment. I don't think it ever goes away, but especially when you're just up and running, you got to evangelize to the world because nobody else is doing it. So hopefully people come and check us out on LinkedIn or visit our website. We've spent a lot of time educating and working with the retailers. We've gotten enough yeses, enough on board, and a really strong pipeline that we're now in market, executing against that. And so with that means getting, to the brands and getting to the advertisers and start to build out more and more of a team. So if anybody found any of this compelling and sees it as an area that they would find interest in, please reach out. We'd love to have a conversation.
Okay. Yeah, we'll include all that in the show notes. We'll include it when we kind of announce the podcast, links to the site and everything. But Michael, really appreciate you joining us today. Quite a story. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.